very good morning to you on this friendly Friday, the 11th of October. Greetings to our listeners and to Theo, who sits up in the north. Good morning, Theo.
Good morning.
You were slow out of the blocks this
Yeah,
morning.
well, I had to, well, to be honest to everyone, I had to find the blocks first. So
Great having you, Theo.
thank you.
We are so very grateful that you've joined us this morning on the fifth connection on this last working day of the week. We are in Colossians chapter 1, verse 21 to 23. So we continue where we left off yesterday because we are looking at what showcasing skillful living looks like. What does wising up look like? And as the story unfolds, you would see some very interesting aspects of what skillful living looks like. So the question this morning is, what skills show in the life of one who follows the way? What skills show in the life of one who follows the way? In this part of the story, you need to understand that Paul is concerned about the church at Colossae, and he has a concern for their progress in the gospel. I remember as a young child being quite fascinated with silkworms. And from time to time, our parents would buy us a couple of silkworms, and we would sit for days on end watching these worms spin their cocoons as we fed them different kinds of leaves, sometimes mulberry leaves, sometimes a beetroot leaf or two. But they would be given to gorging themselves for a number of days, and that's all they would be doing. They'd be eating. And then there would come a day where they would enter their transform portal, their transformation gateway called a cocoon. And they'd spin this beautiful cocoon, and over a short while, their bodies would change inside of that cocoon. The body of the ugly looking caterpillar would be consumed by a number of enzymes and chemicals that would ultimately change it into what we now call imaginal cells. Imaginal cells are like stem cells, actually the same thing, because an imaginal cell has the potential to transform into any part of that butterfly, as we know with stem cell discovery. And the important thing here to note is that in order to reach the butterfly stage, the worm needs to go through a metamorphosis from the worm to the cocoon to the butterfly. And that's what we see in these few verses that we are looking at, verse 21, 22, and 23. They are a very short section. It is a very short section here that the writer is going to focus on what that transformation looks like. And in verse 21 and verse number 22, the focus here is on God moving us from enmity to amity. Because moving toward maturity has to do with moving from enmity to amity onto maturity in the context of what is really real, in the context of reality. Well, you say, what is reality? Best way I can explain reality, reality is what is really real. What doesn't escape your senses. What comes at you on a daily basis, on a moment by moment basis, that you perceive through your senses. And so it's enmity to amity onto maturity. in the context of reality. And in verse 21 and 22, we are told, Paul says, and you who once were alienated, you were separated, and you were enemies in your mind by wicked works. Yet now he has reconciled in the body of his flesh through death to present you holy and blameless and above reproach in his sight. Now, watch what is happening in these two lines of this text. God is the one who brings us from a point of an enemy to the point of a friend. So moving from an enemy to a friend is what we call, or what the scriptures calls, reconciliation. It's moving from disorder to order, and in verse 23, to a reordered life. Well, what does disorder to order look like? God does something wonderful in our lives when we trust Him as Lord and Savior, because we were separate from Him. We were enemies in our thinking, in our mind, and in our doing. Yet He has brought us to a point of a friend, of friendship in the body of His flesh through death. Who is He reconciled? Well, in the context, He's reconciled Jews and Gentiles in one body, right? One body. And this is a position of amity, a position of loving friendship. Why has He done this? He's moved us from enmity to amity in order to present us blameless. So He moves us from reconciliation, and He wants to continue to see us develop, this is God, to presentation, our presentation before God. Now, some would use this text to teach that God is moving from reconciliation, and if we don't continue in the faith, according to verse 23, then we are damned. So the movement is reconciliation to damnation. Well, the text does not say that. The text says it's reconciliation to presentation. Verse 22, to present you holy and blameless and above reproach in His sight. This is something future, right? And it's not something that is, in a sense, our perfection, our presentation guaranteed in this sense that everyone will present in the same way. Well, because there's something called the judgment seat of Christ. And at the judgment seat of Christ, believers will be judged on the basis of their performance, not for damnation or salvation, but it is for presentation. It is for rewards. And so to understand that the movement is enmity to amity, and then onto maturity in verse 23. It's from disorder to order, to seeing our lives reordered. And again, the fractal idea, death, resurrection, life, death, resurrection, order, disorder, reorder. That's what you see here. Verse 21 starts with the idea of the disorder, the disarray in our lives. We were enemies of God. Then we have become friends of God, reconciled to Him, amity with God, because of the body of His flesh, what He has done in His body through His flesh, through death. So now in verse 23, we are brought from enmity to amity. Verse 23 says, we are now wrought in reality for maturity, because reality is the context in which this transformation takes place. The context in which the caterpillar changes and transforms into a butterfly. But it is hidden, isn't it? You can't see that transformation from the outside. It's on the inside of the cocoon. And there's a sense in which God shuts us up to Himself and transforms us as we trust Him. Now, verse 23. If indeed you continue in the faith, note the word continue. right? The change, the transformation continues. If indeed you continue in the faith. What faith? The faith in which you were grounded, the faith in which you were stabilized. You're stable, grounded, you're steadfast, and you are shiftless. You are not moved. That's what how faith is defined. Your faith is something that grounds you. It's something that makes you steadfast, not bedfast. Some people need blanket victory. They can't get up in the morning. And Paul defines these terms. Faith is that which grounds, makes us steadfast, and renders us immovable, shiftless, because we have a hope to hang on, not moved away from the hope of the gospel which you heard. You have something to hold on to. I want you to watch the movement of what we call fragility in our lives to anti-fragility in our lives, because that's the movement from a fragile, breakable life to a life that becomes unbreakable. But there's something beyond unbreakability, which I'll mention to you in a moment. A fragile life is one that breaks down, a life that does not tolerate change. That's why we need to change for a change. And with all the puns that are intended for that expression, change for a change. Some lives are fragile, other lives are robust. And a robust life is a life that can resist to up to a point, but then breaks. So we don't want fragile lives, nor do we want to have robust lives, because they do break, but they take longer to break. And then some have developed resilient lives. A resilient life is a life that breaks and then bounces back, and then breaks and then bounces back again. It's a life of adaptation. But a life that is anti-fragile is a life that suffers no change. In a sense, it's unbreakable. And that's not what we are to be aiming for. These are some of the stages of transform that we would move through. The goal is to become tropophilic. That's a big word. Tropophilic, right? One who can thrive on uncertainty. And we live in a world of so much uncertainty. The petrol price going up and down, the electricity price skyrocketing, war in the Middle East, consternation in our city, gang violence, the platinum belt in Northwest that faces such great crisis and that is damaging our ecosystem. We think of the syndicates across our cities, our communities living in the middle of mine dumps. Oh, so much uncertainty. And God desires to move us from fragility to tropophilia, to learn to live with the uncertainty. That's what verse 23 is talking about. We need to continue in the faith, grounded, steadfast, unmoved. And this is the gospel which Paul preaches to every creature under heaven. He says, I have become a minister of this gospel. And so this morning, we need to be on the lookout for opportunities to obey, opportunities to move to the next challenge in our life. Since God has reconciled us to himself, not because his anger had to be assuaged or satisfied, but our hostility needed to be quieted. He didn't reconcile us because of a problem in him, in himself, but a problem in ourselves. He's reconciled us to himself. And what will it cost you this morning to change? What will it cost you to change? Douglas Murray has been so brutal in his evaluation and in a discussion with Barry Weiss not too long ago. He was asked, what would it take in the American situation to change the American mind? And he was unflinching. He said, a mass casualty terror attack possibly could do it. Now, God is not kind of imprisoned by one option. He has many, many different options up his sleeve. God will use what it takes to bring about change in my life. Otherwise, He will ultimately change me. He'll take me home. And so this morning, the challenge is great. Are you pressing on to the mark for the goal, for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus, which is the redemption of the body, Christ likeness? Back to you, Theo.
Thank you so very, very much, Terry. And that moving on that Terry is referring to sort of can be captured in this next song that we are going to play. Thank you so very, very much for those of you who joined us this morning during this special set of moments every Monday through to Friday, 7 a.m. here on the Fifth Connection. God bless you, Terry. Once again, thank you, brother. I wish you a wonderful weekend.
Thank you, Theo. Thank you, listeners.
It is the 11th of October, Friday, and we have just concluded another chapter in this incredible unfolding story of what it really means to live with reality in mind, one can say, as we understood a sort of showcase of or an exhibition of skillful living. God bless you all. Thank you so very much. We'll see you back on Monday morning.